Here at GrowUp. We have a wonderful guest here that we're so lucky to have today, a close, dear friend of George Floyd, and he's here to talk about who George Floyd was in the midst of all this chaos. We want to give our platform today to find out who he was, what his messaging was, and hear from the humanity aspect that's getting lost in all of this chaos. So welcome to the show, Reconcile.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me, y'all.
Thanks for being
here. We're
here.
Happy to have you. You know, I know this is a tough time for you. One of the things I wanted to do is read you something that you wrote and have you expand on it for people. I saw you write something that, you know, I felt like is important. You said, I asked one of George Floyd's best friends today, do you think George would have ever imagined the entire world would know his name or that his life would have this impact? He was always telling everyone else to be a voice for the voiceless, but that was actually his destiny. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, it's literally crazy, you know, because, you know, one of the things that's wild about this whole situation is you watch that video and George, 6'6.5", 6'7", 250 pounds. He looks like LeBron James. You know, was such a gentle giant. He had a beautiful spirit to him. You know, he had a deep voice with a little rasp to it, with a little third ward twang to it. But he was always, you know, speaking something positive with some type of hope, some type of message. And he was always cognitive of, you know, his influence on other people. And so, you know, that tweet came from, you know, just knowing him as a person, you know, just the things that were important to him in the community, you know, that the community would be better, the community would change, you know, text messages that he had sent other people, you know, where he's saying, you know what, hey, whether it's to a aspiring artist, whether it's to a pastor, whether it's to just a young dude in the streets, and hey, man, you know, you can do better. People need to hear, you know, something positive from you, and you have the voice to make a difference. And what's so crazy about that is, you know, for somebody who would tell people that he was that person, his life was the embodiment, and we're watching that unfold right now. So.
Yeah, no, that's, I think you couldn't have said it better. One of the things, you know, I wasn't planning on really going into this, but when I posted a tweet that we were going to have you on today, I saw that some of the comments were actually, you know, I mean, I think in general, people have been unified over the fact that this was wrong, you know, period. But I was kind of surprised to see some people trashing, you know, like that he had made mistakes in his life. And I just wanted to address that real quick at the top of the show.
Yeah,
We've all made mistakes in our life. We've all made mistakes in our life, and that is not what his memory is about. No mistake that somebody makes, you know, gives the right to somebody else stick their knee in the back of their neck.
Amen.
And kill them. Okay.
Yeah.
So I just want to make that clear at the jump of the show. If you think that making mistakes in your life gives the police that right or gives the state the right to take your life, when you are not being, you know, like there's no serious, I mean, it's crazy to me that that's even something that we're arguing. But if you actually believe that and you think that that's, you know, reasonable, then you should probably hop off now because you're not going to like the rest of the show. So I just wanted to get that out of the way since some people apparently think that's what we should be addressing. I want to address the humanity of this. Like, you know, George has a family. He has friends. That gets lost in the shuffle of all this. And I think especially with the riots and the looting and everything crazy we're seeing going on, people have not delved into these human aspects of his life. So I want you to tell me, you know, if people are going to talk about that negative stuff, talk about George Floyd. What was his life like? You know, he turned to, you know, I had seen other people say he turned to God and was a very godly guy. And you guys had baptisms together. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, to give you a fuller scope for it, like I said, Floyd's from Third Ward. He's from the neighborhood where the CUNY Homes Project is located. If you're from CUNY Homes, they call that housing projects the bricks, and so therefore, being from there makes you a brick boy. So Floyd was a brick boy. Floyd grew up in Houston. He was a talented athlete. He played at Jackie Yates High School, which is literally right behind the CUNY Homes housing projects. And he went to college. He went to college down in like the southern Florida area, like around the Sebring area. And then he also played college basketball at Texas A&M, I think Kingville. He got back to the city of Houston. Didn't really, the college thing, I guess, for whatever reason, didn't pan out. If you're a college athlete, there's so many various factors that go into college sports panning out for you, especially at a school that's not a major D1. And sometimes, you end up back home. And so he ended up back home and ended up making some decisions. But when he was released, and I met Floyd like around, I want to say 2011-ish. And we had a outreach concert. I was a part of a church called Good Hope Missionary Baptist, which is a staple of that neighborhood, that and Wheeler Baptist Church. And we had an event where, a lot of the college students, because in that area you have Rice University, which is like the Ivy League school of the South. I went there, was about a half a mile west. TSU is like walking distance north, and then University of Houston is literally across Scott Street from TSU. And so you had a lot of college students that would congregate at that church, and there was a thriving student ministry, and there was a pastor there named Patrick Nguolo, who's a longtime friend of George as well. And we decided that we wanted to impact the neighborhood that the church was a part of. Too many times churches in those areas are filled with people who commute, and they're not really, they're not made up of the members of the actual community. And so we went out to the neighborhood. We passed out flyers about this, this essentially an outreach concert, rap concert. And we wanted people from the neighborhood to be a part of it and experience the message of the gospel and the hope and the change that comes inside that message. And two of the people that showed up to the event from the housing projects were a young man named Jairo and a big, tall guy named Floyd. And after the event, one of the things that was apparent to, that was part of George's heartbeat was he was like, man, we need to do more things like this for our community. This music, the message, the hope, the same way that it impacted me and that it's impacting me right now through you guys, I want to see that take place in the community. And so what started out as a rap concert outreach turned out being a thriving community ministry where people, elderly people were took to the doctor, where groceries were being brought to homes, where people were prayed for, till we ended up actually even doing church service in the middle of the housing projects on the basketball court. And none of the headway that we made in that community as far as gospel change would have happened without George Floyd's direct impact, his direct relationships, him putting his name and reputation on the line, him bringing street guys out to say, hey, this is what we want to see happen in our community. And I think, 10 years of ministry is owed to George Floyd being a peacemaker and a waymaker in the community. And so, I don't think a lot of people understand that about him. He's the type of guy, you know the type of people that arrive early to set up chairs. Like, that's a different type of person in general, right? That's the type of person that he was. Set up chairs, break down chairs, help serve food, go walk and talk to people in the neighborhood, play football and basketball with kids in the open field, tell kids, hey, go to school, stay out of trouble, or you're going to be in trouble with me. That's the type of person he was, even to the extent that I remember, him helping me set up a baptism on the court. And one of the young men that was baptized was actually a young man that he had mentored that called him Uncle, Uncle Floyd. So that's who he was. There's a term that's coined in hip hop. It's called OG. Somebody says, yeah, he an OG. And what it used to mean is original gangster. But that's not who George Floyd was. When people called him OG in the community, it meant somebody who survived the community, somebody who has the wisdom and the tenacity to know what it takes to help somebody else survive the neighborhood. And he was an uncle, he was a brother, he was a father figure for a lot of good people.
I think we're having a small problem with your audio. It was just it's coming in and out there. But I will say this, you know, from what you're saying, you're describing, you know, like he was a mentor at a certain point, like as his life turned, you know, and he was doing this ministry, he was turning into more of a mentor for young people. And that's something I really wanted to sort of make sure that gets across, is that he wanted to get young guys off the street. He didn't want people in gangs, people living the street life. He wanted them to have better, to have more, you know, and that's something like that's important to me, being Hispanic, coming from a community that had a lot of low income. In my school, we had, you know, all types of rival gangs and stuff. And I just wanted so badly for everybody to be able to lift out of that, you know, and not participate in that vicious cycle. And it sounds like that's where he ended up, was wanting to help people break that vicious cycle. And, you know, I think that's an important part of the story, because especially as we look at these riots, you know, we have riots all over America, you know, small businesses being looted all over America. This doesn't sound like something from the descriptions that I'm hearing that George Floyd would be okay with, that he would think are productive, or that would bring honor to his memory. What can you say about that, about the riots and the looting?
I mean, just to echo his brother. Here, let me see if this works. You guys hear me?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. Just to echo his brother, I mean, you know, he's on the news saying, hey, that's not our family. That's not what we do. That's not what we're about. We don't stand for that in any way, shape, or form. And, you know, George was a person that understood people's hurt and pain. He was a man of the people. But he wasn't someone that advocated for the destruction of our own community. You know, I think anybody who understands the dynamics of what we're actually fighting for knows that that's not what we're trying to do in any way, shape, or form. And, you know, and just the angle you say, and it's weird, you know, in our country, we say, and this is a challenge to evangelical community in the United States.
Can you check your mic real quick if something's touching it? Because it sounds like you go from perfectly clear to kind of sounding like you're underwater.
Okay, let me check this. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right. Does that still sound like I'm underwater a little bit?
A little bit. Maybe try unplugging it real fast and plugging it back in.
All right, I'm back in there.
Okay, let's see. Yeah, I think you're pretty clear now. So yeah, if you can, tell us more about that with the, you know, riots and looting.
Yeah, so I hear it a little bit, and we're gonna push through.
Should we just try to pull the mic out?
Yeah, maybe pull the mic out. Let's try that.
Let's do that. All right, that's no mic.
Cool.
So far, so good.
Okay. So when you look at the makeup of people who are in the streets rioting and looting, I think you're looking at multiple different groups that have, I don't want to say all of them have the same agenda. Some of them might have some solidarity, but there's different people hurting and different people standing for different things. And George Floyd's death means different things to different people. I think for some group, for the African-American community, George's death represents, you know, we're still unheard. This is still happening. There's no change or little change. And we feel voiceless, powerless, and we want to be heard. And we want the change to occur. And we want the United States mainstream population to pay attention to this and care about it. Then I think you have other people who are out there and say, you know what? Not only do I agree with that group, But I also understand that this isn't just about George Floyd. This is about discontentment with our country as a whole, discontentment with our leadership, discontentment with how we handle immigration, discontentment with how we handle, just what it means to be a human being in America and not have access to the American dream. And then also you have a group that is.
We're losing you a little bit with the audio again. How about this? I'm gonna kick you from the studio real quick, and you just come back in. I think something's wrong with your feed on your end, because our end the audio is good. So I'm just gonna push you out real quick, and then just hop back in.
All right, that sounds good.
All right, y'all, bear with us for a second. We want to make sure we get to hear what he has to say.
What he has to say, yeah, it's important. So I don't want people to be kind of guessing what it is. I will say this, as we wait for him to come back on, I think that what we're kind of lost in at this point too is the political side of this. People are lost in the fact that we're seeing this as, it's kind of like everything else in society. We've gotten stuck in this place where everything has to be political and it consumes everything. And I think what's important about this story, aside from the looting, aside from, the rioting and all that stuff, when it comes to just the issue about George Floyd, it really, there shouldn't be partisan lines here. It should be very sort of just a human thing of like, I could even say this, even if you think that something else contributed to his death or whatever you think, at the very least, at the core of this, there's a human issue that what the officer did was wrong. He should not have had his knee in the back of George's neck for 9 minutes. There was no excuse for that. There was no, there's no way to excuse that.
Robbie, so, where is he?
He's hopping back on. He's clicking the link. I think he may be fixing his, oh, there he is.
All right. Is that better?
All right, there we go.
All righty. Sorry about that. All right, so we're back.
You guys dive in together and I will be right there.
Okay, so I think we lost you a little bit, talking about just, the message, wanting the Black community wanting to be heard, but there's different factions getting involved here and hijacking that messaging.
Right. So yeah, you have different groups. I think some of those groups are in solidarity, and some of those groups are, kids and want to be out the house. But I think what's beautiful is that you have a group that is growing. And I think that group's been there before. And that's your group of whites that say, hey, you know what? I don't want this country the way that it's been before, and I'm willing to stand. I'm willing to use my voice, my platform, to say, hey, you know what? I'm done with this, and I want the future to be better than what the past was. And I think that group has grown, and I think that's beautiful too. It's tremendous. But I think there's also other groups that are, and just the rioting and the looting. It does. It's expedient to the other side's narrative. That's why we're not listening. That's why we dismiss you. That's why. Et cetera, et cetera. And so that's why I think you see the family, George Floyd's brother said, if you don't see me out here acting crazy, what would make you think that you need to be out here acting crazy? If anybody should be, hurt to the maximum or to the extreme, it's me. I'm experiencing this immediate, very close part.
Right. Absolutely. I think it's unfortunate because this is such an opportunity to have this conversation while, in the midst of the friends of George Floyd, the family of George Floyd, while people are paying attention now, it's such an opportunity to have a conversation. And unfortunately, media is letting that be drowned out a lot. And we're missing the humanity, we're missing the message here. So, I don't see mainstream media covering this side of it, other than, the recent interview I think a local station did with his brother. But, what message, do you have, for our audience? What message, do you think that needs to be heard?
I think we can put together policies, we can put together propositions, we can do all kind of things to kind of bring accountability to our police force, to try to lessen the inequality gap in America. But the challenge is, and what will always trump anything that we can do, is the human heart. If hearts are filled with hate and rage, there's not too much that we can do. And so I think the greatest thing that we can try to do as a collective is listen and try to understand and have a heart, and be willing to lay down our bias, our positions, our angles, what your dad used to say, your experiences, and be willing to open yourself up to new ones and listen. And the way I think that's fleshed out is, all of us have platforms of our families, and we have circles that we do have influence over. And it's time for us to reshape the argument and ask ourselves critical questions. And then I think when we look inside, if we can't begin to have love in here, there's no way that our world will change. And so I think, I'm taking this from the good book. The Bible says that love covers a multitude of sin. And I think love can cover this situation. And if we allow, like if you're watching the news and you say, man, America is changing. It's not the America that we knew. But it doesn't have to change for the world. You know what I'm saying? That's the decision that we make, right? To say, how will I adjust to this change? And will I be a part of the positivity? Or will I be a part of the negative rhetoric and the hate? And so if we can change here, and we change our homes, and we change our sphere of influence in the conversations that we have, and if we are more inclusive, especially I think even in the African-American community, a lot of the leaders have been so exclusive. And the change that we need is inclusive. And I love, you look at Dr. King, he was inclusive to the solution. And we're not going to get over this. We won't get over the racism stain of our country unless Black, white, brown, Latino, Asian come together, lock arms, and say, no, this is not the future that we want for ourselves.
That's right.
Yeah, and you know what I was talking about while you were off and you were getting your connection back together is the political side of this, because as much as everybody wishes that it was not a political conversation, there is political stuff.
It's politicized now.
And the political side of it here is that I saw something happen different with George Floyd's case. At the very beginning, the first day of protests, I saw something I've never seen in previous protests like Baltimore or Ferguson or any of this stuff. I saw some guys on TV and they were interviewing them and they asked them why they were there. And they said, look, we're white rednecks, but we saw the video same as anybody else and it was wrong. So we just wanted to let people know, like we'll come here. We're armed old country rednecks and we're here and we're going to walk with you guys and protect you guys, but we're with you, type of thing. I had never seen that before. Right. And I think that there's something different here. There's something different, and I don't know that you can attribute it to just the video. I think that there's a lot of other factors, but I think the video is part of it being so visceral and so clear that this has crossed party lines to just like everybody just saying, this is not acceptable. And I think that we have a wonderful opportunity coming out of coronavirus where so many Americans saw that police, not all police, but some police were really overstepping their mandate and doing unconstitutional things like arresting parents for playing catch with their kids.
Right.
I think a lot of people started to see, oh shit, you know what? There really is a problem here. There is a problem here that there are some officers that are overstepping the bounds of their authority. And as silly as that sounds to somebody, I think that all these connections culminated in this moment where we really do have unified support for police reform. And I think that police reform used to scare, like just the phrase used to scare some people into thinking, it's going to be like the UK where police don't have guns at all. And they're coming to people's houses to ask them if they said something mean, and that's not what police reform has to be. Police reform can be something that makes the job safer for police and citizens. So if police are in a position where they're de-escalating, the numbers are going to bear out that less police die as well. as people, as citizens. So, I think we have a lot of things we can do that are pretty clear up front with training and de-escalation and just community outreach. These things all together, I mean, the militarization of police is a whole other side of this, because the protests I've seen go well that didn't have looting and didn't have rioters and all that stuff have been protests where police were dressed more normally, they were not militarized, and they were talking to community members, they were reaching out to them, they were having conversations, they were building bridges, and I think we need to see more community leadership in that sense. And I think that, obviously there's a time where you have to be, in my opinion, kind of strong in your response. And I think with the looters and rioters and the arsonists and the Antifa and these anarchists, I think you do have to be tough on shutting this down, because they're ruining small businesses in predominantly minority communities. I think you have to shut it down, period. But in terms of the future, I think we really do have an opening here. Do you see that too?
Yeah, it feels different. The wind feels different. It reminds me, I can liken it to when Fred Hammond reached out to, Fred Hammond was a Black Panther, a young Black Panther, in the, I forget what year it was that he was assassinated, but he reached out to the coal miners in West Virginia. Yeah. And somehow he was able to show them that there were similarities in the plight that they had. There were similarities in the plight between inner city people in the United States, and coal miners in West Virginia. And the West Virginia coal miners actually came out to Chicago and they protested with Black Panthers. And
I'd never heard that story before. I'd have to read about that. I've never heard of that.
And then he was assassinated. And
that's something that I think a lot of people don't talk about, is that strong Black leaders consistently in history were killed. And if you look deeply at that, I think there's a lot of things there that should be very concerning about that, because we need somebody who's a unifying figure right now. And I think that the fact we don't have that really has sort of made George's memory that figure, and so it's like, speaking through people like you and his family, I think that, we have a chance to have some of that unity. I think that, like, where I'm disappointed right now is that so much of the rioting has now become politicized, with whether or not to bring a National Guard or don't bring them and everything.
Yeah. It's going to affect the election.
Really, it's muddying the waters on what really matters,
If I could throw out just a couple things to think about. All right, so one, I think because the humanity in that video is you can't deny a person's humanity and calling out to his mom.
Yeah.
I think you have groups that would vote a certain way, but now they're looking and they're thinking, they're challenging their thoughts. Like, for example, evangelical Christian might say, you know what, yeah, we vote Republican. I'm not so strong on Trump, but I'm not pro-life. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think, I'm against abortion. But now they might say, yeah, I'm against abortion. But, the Bible says good religion is to care for those of the least, and I think, we look at the African-American community, I care for them, and I should have a heart for them, and I should care for those that don't have a voice, and so I think those communities are starting to look at things differently. I think you have communities, and I think this is another thing to point out. You look at Minnesota is a blue state. It's bled blue for a long time. Yeah. And I think there's opportunity to say, hey, you know what? We need to make this state great again. And let's flip this to red, and let's run an election on law and order. I think much of this has been politicized, and I think it will be politicized.
Oh yeah, no, it is. I mean, Minnesota's lost. Minnesota's not going to be blue in 2020. I would make that. I would make a gigantic bet to that after what happened there and the riots and everything. I do think you're right about, you touched on something there on voting. I make no secret that I'm a Republican. I'm also, I think one of the reasons people follow me and you know, I've built a following is that I am not a sycophant for anybody. You know, I'm going to always be real, and I'm always going to be honest. If I disagree with a party position, I'm going to say why I disagree with it. I'm going to be very nuanced with it, and I'm going to be detailed. And, you know, I think that we've been terrible at messaging to minority communities. We have been miserable at it because we have a lot to offer minority communities. We don't communicate what we have to offer too often. And, you know, we abandon the fight in a lot of ways. And you look at the cities where there's just been unparalleled destruction, rising crime, you know, and all these things that just, the Black community has given so much to the Democratic Party. And this is where my issue, this is kind of separate from George Floyd, just for, you know, the sake of the conversation, because I don't want to bring him into this, but, you know, going into those places like Baltimore, you know, Chicago, Black people have given the Democratic Party so much free reign, and they've gotten nothing back. You know, they really haven't. They've gotten a less safe city. They've got higher taxes. They've got, you know, rising crime and militarized police. So, you know, something's not working. And I'm not telling them the Republican Party is, you know, this perfect, amazing party. There's issues in every party. Yeah. But I do think we have an opportunity in front of us to have the most diverse Republican Party there's been in modern times. Because I can tell you this, I do know that the president, if right now we put together a team, and I know this is being discussed right now at the White House, put together a team that is bipartisan of people on both sides, just like there was with the First Step Act, on police reform, from law enforcement side and from the citizen side, you know, and bring in voices from even organizations like BLM and get to an actual agreement on what's going to help citizens and police. I think that can be a breeding ground for change and can really open up the door and windows to a lot of people who would have never considered it before because the messaging was terrible. But I do think, you know, something shifted. The Republican Party didn't used to be populist. You know, it was very much so like it was a more religiously oriented conservatism. We're a very populist party now that's about people and about the middle class and stuff like that. And so a lot of things are shifting in that direction. And I think that this is an opportunity here to open up and message correctly to minority communities and really let them know that, you know, there's an option here and we do have solutions.
Yeah. And I hear you. Something's going on with the mic. It's going like a little richer. You guys hear that?
Now you're clear.
Now you're clear.
It's kind of going in and out. Okay.
I think one of the things at play, I know there was a while back in time where they asked, they were going to push a bill through or something like that where politicians weren't allowed to lie in campaigns. Right. And the bill was just like annihilated. It was like, no, we have to lie. We have to lie in our campaigns. And campaigns are built on lies. They're built around lies. Negative ads are stronger than a positive ad.
Yeah.
I think the same thing that we've done with lying and negative ads to get people elected and to keep voter bases strong is we use racism. We use people like us mentality. And I think that is why you see.
You're going out again.
Can you guys hear me?
Now we can, yeah.
Yeah, I think racism has been utilized to keep voter bases strong. And I think people like us mentality is encouraged. And so what you see is you have a poor white guy in Western Kentucky thinks the problem with the world is inner city issues that cost a lot of tax dollars. You have the inner city being propagated to that the problem with the world is, you know, all these issues around whatever it is, right? And I think if people were to see that the guy who lives in North Florida has similar issues to the guy who lives in South Florida in the city, and not to divide those people and divide those groups further along political lines just because we know, hey, this is a guaranteed vote. Then maybe you could have more diverse parties. If you had more diverse parties and votes weren't guaranteed, then maybe you have better policies. Maybe you have things that more reflect the democracy than, what's it called, a demagogue?
Yeah.
What we have, and so it's just another wrinkle to the conversation. But if we're just going to go to our corners and fight for our own points and not try to see each other and hear each other, then George Floyd's death will be in vain. Instead of it being an initiator of change, it'll be an initiator of a race war.
Yeah.
Right. I think you said it really well. And I think you're right. Racism has been, a medium for people to use, to get political points and to, basically claim like they own, certain groups of people, or that people are monoliths. And
well, take for example the voter ID. I have a major issue with this. I don't know how you feel about it. If you disagree, you're allowed to disagree on the show, so don't be afraid. On voter ID, it drives me crazy when I hear white liberals say that Black people can't get an ID. It is the most racist concept to me to assume that Black Americans are incapable of getting an ID that would be free, by the way. It just sounds like a major cop-out. And you talk to
voter IDs are very easy to get. When you get a driver's license, you can get a voter ID. When you sign up for any government benefit,
exactly,
you get a voter ID.
Or let's pretend your driver's license is a voter ID, because in some states, that's what they require is a driver's license. Like, you need an ID as an adult to function in this society. Mm-hmm. If you're not functioning in this society, then I'd be surprised if you're voting, if you're driving down to the poll to vote. And even if you were, and say you were low income, you can't afford a voter ID.
Here's the challenge to the voter ID. The pushback is, if you are a part of society where some of those services are now withheld from you because of maybe mistakes from your past or choices that you made because you come from areas where every day is hell and shit, then it might be difficult to get a voter ID. For example, if you're a felon, or if you've had something happen where you can't get access to government funds anymore,
well, that's kind of the case already, though. Like, if you go and you vote and you're a felon in the states where you're not allowed to, they're going to nullify the vote anyways. So in the case that, I guess it kind of depends on the state. It depends on the state and what their voting laws are. But in terms of just the pure concept of saying, like, white liberals saying that Black Americans are incapable of getting a voter ID, it drives me crazy. It's the racism and bigotry of low expectations. I don't think that way about any race of people. I think that we're all born with the dignity and ability to do whatever we put our minds to doing. It's going to be harder for some people than it is for others, because we're not born with equity. I believe, that we should have equal opportunities, but not equal outcomes. Our outcome is dependent on our ability and our drive to reach to the next thing. If I make the choice to just watch Netflix all day, I can't complain that my life sucks.
Absolutely.
And those are the things that I feel like that sort of bigotry of low expectations we see from, especially like the super far left, white Antifa people, up to the Hillary, white liberals. And I hate to generalize, but I see it so often from that specific group of people about those types of issues. And I think that it's, we see that in so many ways. I'm not going to deny it doesn't happen on the right either, because it does. I've seen some fringe Republican candidates go into being, almost sounding like they're white nationalists. So I have heard that from somebody like Paul Nealon, who was running and thankfully lost. But people like that who they go and they veer into this super racist direction themselves. I think that all of that is something that's toxic to our system, and we need to move towards something that really starts to count us as human beings versus what color we are. You know?
And just to bring it back to the Black Lives Matter, and there's 2 points you made, I think, that are key to what people are standing for and marching for and protesting about. So if you let's take the voter ID thing, right, and say, well, it might be challenging for you to get a voter ID if you have a record, but that's a mistake that you made. But I think one of the things that, that these groups are marching for and trying to bring to the forefront is when you live in a neighborhood or an area that's over-policed, your life chances are already challenging because your school's failing. And I'm not just talking like theoretically. I've lived in, I work in multiple cities in these systems, and you see like for example, it's like they're not the schools aren't failing kids, they're passing kids that shouldn't be passed because they can't read, right? And these kids, you say, hey, what's your homework? It's like, well, I'm supposed to write it down from the board. Well, where's your book? They don't give us books. It's like, how do you do a math class without a book? And it's like,
let me ask you a question about that, because this is I think this is a really important point you're touching on with education. And these are the things that there's bad communication on the politics side of this. Republicans believe in school choice. Democrats do not. Democrats stand on the side of you have to have public education. You go to the school in your district, and they bow to the teachers' unions. And you it's so difficult to fire a teacher because of these unions. It's unbelievable. So if you have a terrible teacher who's doing a terrible job, who's passing kids who can't read, they're not getting fired under their version of what's the best for our kids. As a Republican, I believe that your kid in the poorest community should have the ability to go to any school with the money that we would normally spend at a public school. So, for example, if we said every kid in America is worth $16,000 a year in public schooling, that's what we spend, okay, on each child, then I would say, hey, you know what? We're going to give this family the ability to choose to go to this charter school or to this private, Catholic school or Baptist school, whatever it is. You can go to that school and we will pay $16,000, whatever it is, of the tuition. That's what I, as a Republican, believe in, and that's what the whole party believes in, is school choice. I think that those kids in those poorest parts, they're entitled to as good of an education as any other kid. The way they were born shouldn't, dictate that. And I say that especially coming from a school system that had gangs, had issues, and not every kid could go to a private school. And I think that those are the types of things that we need more accountability in schools so that kids are getting a better education. And the way we're going to get that is with competition, where we can send kids to other schools. And then by proxy, those public institutions are going to have to do better if they want kids to go there.
Right. So what I think you see actually play out is you have that idea, that ideology, and then you have competing ideologies, and then you actually have the budget of the school system in whatever county. And what you see play out is, like, especially in the city, it's very different in counties and small towns where there's only maybe 1 or 2 schools in the area. But when it comes to the city, what happens is, if you can afford to, or you have the means to, if you put your kid in a good school. But if you don't have the means to, and your kid, then they tell you, well, then you're zoned to this area. So what happens is, affluent families put their kids in good schools. And then the charter schools fill up based on the demand and need, which there's waiting lists for the charter schools, and then everybody else is zoned to a school that's failing. And then in those schools that are failing, you have teachers that to be honest, don't have the resources to even give the kids what they need to succeed. Then you have teacher burnout, and then it's a deplorable system. And then when you talk about, okay, well, we need funding for it, and then each election the funding changes, statewide, locally. And so it's a mess. But who always gets the short end of that mess is minority students.
Yeah, I agree. See, this is the stuff that I think that there's not enough conversations like we're having right now, because, like, I'm a Republican. I fully agree with you. It's not fair. Minority communities,
and I don't identify either way. It's just right is wrong is wrong.
Exactly.
I think if I was to put on paper, I might be a split of both. I might be mixed, it's like biracial. But I think right is right and wrong is wrong. And I think there's not just one way to look at it. You have to put all the conversations on the table, and you can't get caught up in the actual, you can't get caught up in the political jargon and the political stalemate, because people's lives are at hand, and I think that's why we need mild-mannered people with common sense to take office and run and share ideas. And I don't think their political party would matter so much if it was just based on ideas and right is right and wrong is wrong. But I think so much of our political institutions are based on other things. It's based on doing this for somebody. It's based on something else. It's based on tax dollars coming in. It's based on stocks. It's based on all kind of other stuff. And we say we're for the people, and it's not for the people at all.
Yeah, we're in full agreement on that.
Absolutely. And when we have these kind of conversations, you realize how much more we have in common.
Come on.
Yeah.
Come on. Just conversations.
Yeah, this is why it's so important to have these conversations, to listen to one another, because we realize if you're able to have a civil conversation like we're showing people right now that we're doing, we come to solutions. And that's what we should focus on, is policy. What policy uplifts the Black community here in this city? What fixes the issue here specifically? Because if we don't talk about policy, then we're not getting anything done. We're not changing the system. We're just talking about, being morally, better than one another, and my party does this. We should, erase all that and focus on policy.
And I think the challenge there, where the racism is embedded inside these parties, is that if I say we're going to, put this policy in place to uplift this community because this community is systematically and historically behind, then you're going to have a base say, well, how does that decision help our voter base? How does that decision help me? I voted for you because you're supposed to help me, and you're helping somebody else, and therefore you only help your constituents.
Well, that brings up a good point, because you look at the communities and you look at their reps. The reps aren't always living like the people in the communities are, and the reps need to be truly representative of the people that know the issues, know the communities.
Yes.
That's what we have to have.
And this is just a microcosm of how it works in other places. So I worked inside the Third Ward neighborhood where George is from. And I remember I was in college, I was working with Dr. Penn doing some independent research about the correlation between crimes in areas that are overpopulated with churches. How is there so much crime when there's 5 churches on this corner, right? And so I went in and I started, speaking to pastors and asking them those questions, like, how is this happening? Why don't you partner with the church across the street, et cetera? And then what I started uncovering was these pastors would tell me, well, we can't really help the community. I said, why can't you help the community? Well, because the community doesn't really go to church here. Well, I said, who goes to church here? Well, about 85% of our members commute to this church. Okay, that's crazy. And so I can't really put any of our money or our dollars into rebuilding the community, because if I do that, the church will die. The community, when they become members of our church, they don't tithe, they don't give, they don't have the means to tithe, they don't have the means to give, and therefore we focus on the people that commute to this church. And so what's bred out of that is us versus them. This church versus the community instead of this church helping the community.
Wow. That's interesting. I mean, that it makes a big, I think that's why there is some systemic reform that has to happen. Specifically what you just brought up with these these areas, the people that are in charge of them, there has to be more accountability, number one, but number two,
we don't have accountability.
Absolutely. I mean, who's in charge of that area? There need to be leaders that step up, that are going to say, I'm accountable for the crime that goes on here. I'm accountable for the funds that go into these public schools. I'm accountable.
I mean, it drives me nuts. You look at a place like Baltimore, and it just makes me so angry, because how many mayors in a row has it been for Baltimore that have ended up in jail for bribery and all kinds of criminal stuff? Like one of them did a secret deal where they were using city funds to buy their own book from themselves and get a kickback of the dollars in order to support certain policies. Like, these people have just been totally corrupt in every sense. And at the same time they're doing all this crazy stuff, You have public schools in Baltimore that don't have heaters in the winter.
Right.
They don't have a heater in an entire school, you know? That's just unacceptable. When the money's there, there was money there, but it was repurposed for you to be a criminal. And that's why I go hard on like these big city areas like that with the Democrats who run them. I hate to have to just like hammer that, but I'm hammering it because it's wrong. Like there's money there and they're misusing it in other places. Instead of, you know, you have to take care of your seeds. We're not taking care of our seeds. We're not taking care of our kids, our most vulnerable parts of society. We want our kids not to be in gangs. We want our kids to be productive, happy, joyful members of society. We have to take care of them. We have to educate them. We have to give them safe places to play.
And
we
live.
have to give them safe places to go if they're in an abusive home. We have to give them safe alternatives if the only option they see is joining a gang. If we don't do that, we failed. The kid didn't fail. They'll get called a failure when they're an adult, and your choices as an adult are your own, and you have to live with them, and that's fine. But we still failed that kid, you know? And I think that's something that we have to be honest about. We have a role to play in this.
Absolutely.
How do we make sure that kids stop failing?
And to echo your sentiment, we have to keep our leaders accountable at every level. You know, it seems like the Democrats are more, you know, have more leadership in the cities, and the Republican Party has more leadership over the state and the smaller counties. And each party, each leader, I don't care who they are, what color skin they are, they need to be held accountable. I don't know if you guys can hear me. Can you guys hear me?
You know what?
Underwater again.
Lean forward. Whenever you lean forward, I feel like it gets a little better.
You guys can hear me better?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, but what you were saying is that they have to be, whether they're Republican or Democrat.
Republican, Democrat, black, white, blue, Chinese, I don't care. You need to be held accountable. And the people need to hold you accountable. Because what happens is, and the same thing you say, where money can be misallocated in the city, you know, we've had situations where the governor took the money that was supposed to be for communities, and what he did was build communities in small towns where the number one source of income and source of employment was the prison of the small town. You know, and it's like that plays off of inner city family and people going to that prison, and that's a horrible system. And so I think we need accountability 100% of the way around.
Absolutely. I wish there could, and we feel like we could talk for hours. I mean, there's so many ideas that we could talk about and you know, accomplish. And this is a really, I think this conversation, it brought a lot of hope to me. And I hope it did the same for our viewers, because this is exactly why we did this show.
We can do this.
Have conversations like this.
We can have conversations, and we could come to a common sense middle ground. And then the more conversations we have, the more appreciation we'll have for one another, and the more respect, and you know, and some of that hatred and division will die in us. Love you guys. I really appreciate you guys having me on.
Yeah. One last question for you, because a question somebody asked earlier, and I think it's an interesting one. We know what needs to be done on the police side of things. Like, that's pretty clear. We've had a lot of people come together in working groups all over the country, Republican and Democrat, pretty similar stuff in terms of what needs to change. On the flip side, on the community end of this, what can we do to make interactions safer for everybody on the other side? So if somebody legitimately gets stopped for a legitimate reason, I mean, like, you just watch an episode of Live PD and you can see a lot of the crap cops put up with it's pretty crappy, you know, and nobody denies they have kind of a crappy job. It's hard. You know, there's a lot of rude, you know, non-compliant people. How can we get the message to communities that, like, there's a two-way street here? You deserve respect, but you need to also be respectful, and we can all leave this in a happier place, you know?
Right. So I said this in a song. It's a song called Just Another Nigga, and you can check it out. It's on, check it out and listen to it, because the lyrics are about specifically what we're talking about. To be African American in the United States, that's the hardest thing to live in. But to have your profession be a police officer is the hardest profession in the United States. And I have a buddy, he is an African American officer in the Sunnyside and Yellowstone 3rd Ward area of Houston. And I've done ride-alongs with him, and the things that people say to him, the way that people treat him. And he's like, I chose to be an officer because I wanted brown skin to represent this badge. And so somebody would have a little bit more cultural sensitivity before they pull the trigger, before they lock somebody up. And that's why I wanted to be an officer in my neighborhood. And he says, and I just to watch the disrespect that he endured, just being an officer and saying, somebody will disrespect me, but if there's a domestic violence charge, they want me there. They want my presence. If something happens, you want me to show up. And I think that's hypocrisy as well. So you can't wipe that underneath the rug. You can't do none of that as well. But I think when you think about the African American community and law enforcement, you have law enforcement that doesn't understand the dynamics of the community, doesn't understand the culture, doesn't understand how people work, think, how they make it through life. Like, for example, say you catch somebody stealing in a community that's being over-policed, and you have somebody that hasn't been able to pay rent 3-4 months in a row, and you could have no compassion for that person. You know what I mean? It's or you see a young man and he's engaged in a robbery, or he's engaged in an altercation or a gang activity, and you start to realize, where's your father at, man? Well, he's incarcerated. What about your mom? Well, I don't see her much. Well, what are you doing out here? Have you been to school? I don't go to school. Why? Because I can't read. And not have compassion for that. And then to over-police those communities, to overcharge that community court fees, to lock up everybody in the community. It's hard to grow up in that community and come out unscathed. Mm-hmm. And that's what people are out protesting about. You don't understand the life outcomes and the experience of not having nothing, not owning nothing, feeling like you can't be nothing, feeling like you don't have a voice, being over-policed, having violence on your street, trauma in your home, somebody being murdered, never being able to talk to somebody about that. And that's what people are protesting. That's the hardest job, and that's the hardest skin color to live in America. And what I think is, what we need is, the African American community needs great policing. It doesn't need poor policing. In Liberty City, that was the Liberty City beat, which is the hardest community in Miami. That was a beat that they sent officers they were punishing. Like, okay, you made a mistake. You don't get to work South Beach no more. You don't get to work downtown. You got to work in Liberty City, where everybody lives in poverty. And that's where you got officers beating up people. And that's when you got the McDuffie riots, because those officers were acquitted.
Yeah.
So
I think that we could go on all day. I mean, I think we just need to have him back on.
Yeah, you got to come back on.
To talk about
let me know what the people say, man.
Other issues, I think the more we can have these conversations, like, we're not always going to agree on everything.
Of course.
We can get somewhere, like, we really can get to pragmatic middle grounds, figure out things that make sense for everybody. And I think the more we do this, we're all American. This is all of our country. I've seen a lot of people talk about us splitting up, getting divorced as a country. We just talked about it yesterday on the show, about the amount of people that sort of are like, this has come across their mind this weekend. Like, we live in two different Americas. We don't have to, we don't have to live in two different Americas.
Simple concept, bro. If me and you were, let's say we both caught a flight to France, right? And we're walking the street, and I run into you and I hear you speak a little English. And I say, hey, man, where you from? I'm an American. I'm an American. Everything from back home doesn't even matter no more. We're American. We share American culture, right? And so instead of dividing amongst our stuff, we need to see each other as brothers and sisters.
Yeah, I agree. And that's why I care so much about our country and taking pride in America, because, yes, there's been mistakes in the past in our country.
But there's things that are broken that need to be fixed.
Exactly. And this is something I tell people that are like, well, why do you say the country is great? And I say, because it's our spirit. Our spirit is a country about wanting to be better. Our spirit is a country that, we never just end up completely stagnant. There's always people pushing to be better, innovate, create a new company, a new idea, a new thing. you know, and you look back, I compare it to a marriage. If you're in a marriage and when you guys were dating, okay, the first week you were dating, you know, one of you had an ex before that and you kissed that ex or whatever. If you're still talking about that after you've been married for 20 years, you're not going to have a healthy relationship. And that's why I talk about the greatness of America and our possibilities and our abilities and what can make us greater versus harping on just like, hey, these people who are dead right now were terrible people. We all get that terrible things were done 100 years ago. You know, everybody knows that.
Right.
I'm focusing on how to recenter all of us to the future.
Yeah. We can't still be kissing the ex though. And I think that's the problem here. We're still kissing the ex.
I'm with you on that.
Like, I want to forgive you, but you're still in your with
Exactly. I'm with you on that.
You know, I think one thing that's beautiful about the African-American community, I think it's a very forgiving community. It's a very forgiving community. I think the African-American community is forgiving America more than any community. And I think that says a lot about, you know, the hope that we have to move forward.
Yep. I have a lot of hope. I do have hope. You know, I've been very upset, very angry this week. It, like, especially just, you know, like seeing the human cost of all of this, just the whole thing. I've been mostly upset, mostly angry. I'm not easy to get angry. Landon will tell everybody, like, I don't get angry. I'm very, like, I keep a good attitude no matter what. There's very few things that make me upset. And I was surprised by how much this affected me because I've seen a lot of, you know, gruesome videos on the internet and stuff like that have come along in cases. And I'm surprised how much this affected me. It really did. It really, really, really bothered me. I've still heard his voice every day when I think about the case. And I want us all to get to a better place, you know? So I'm glad we had this conversation because this is the first time I've not been super upset about everything that's going on right now. And like the riots are not in my head and all that stuff. Because I feel like, you know, we're connecting and we just need to do that more.
Let's continue to be progressive, bro. I thank you for having me on the show. I love what you're doing right here.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you so much. Have a good one.
God bless
you for joining us.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for joining us today. We will see you guys tomorrow. We have Scott Pressler on tomorrow. If you don't know Scott, he's been an activist for cleaning up our communities. He's done cleanups all over the country, places like Baltimore, San Francisco, basically areas run by Democrats where they don't take care of the actual city for people. So Republicans go in there, clean up the trash, take care of the area, and ask the hard questions. So Scott will be on tomorrow, and we'll talk about everything he's doing.
Also, we might hop on a live stream because I'm reading all of y'all's comments, and I would like to maybe talk about some of the stuff that y'all had to say about that. So,
but we'll do it in a different one, right? You want to do it?
No, I was going to hop on a live stream, not this one.
Yeah, no, that's what I mean. And this one, so
you guys like, I don't know what now. Okay. I think we should hop on one now if you guys are up for it. To answer the questions and talk about it because, you know, I think there's more to be said. Okay. So
cool. Yeah, we'll end this one and then hop back on.
Yeah. See y'all in a minute. Take a potty.